on. You're good. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the UofL Budget Workshop. Just a reminder to mute your microphones if you're not speaking. We've got some excellent. Sorry. I'm going to turn it over to Neely. Can't join us today. She's in another meeting, but I'll turn it over to Vince and Jeff if you all want to kick things off about the budget process.
Sure. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, Neely unfortunately gave us late notice, wouldn't be able to make it this morning, but we wanted to take everybody through the process that for this year's budget, which has been a bit unusual, as you can imagine, with the COVID. We were down a path and it worked on a totally different budget, before everything happened in the middle of March. So since that time, we had to redirect, and I would tell you that I can pridefully tell you that I'm impressed with what our team did collaboratively when we approached this. I think we took a little bit of angst from media early because we were one of the first to get out and make significant changes in our budget, and people were questioning why we were doing that. And then we went from that to being the poster child of making changes in the Division I, and led roundtable discussions on it, and later had 70 universities follow suit and literally use our playbook, and in many cases our actual documents to go about the same process. So this has been an interesting one. We tried to hit it from every facet, as Jeff will take you through the numbers, but it was about trying to protect the student athlete experience while making some nice changes in the budget to adjust to what was going on and what we felt was going on. So at the time we put this together, we were looking at what our flexibility was related to contracts, our own employee contracts, as well as our, and then in conjunction with that, our head coaching contracts and my own contract as to how we could accomplish some things administratively. Lots of in-depth discussions over a couple weeks' time about how to utilize the furlough process inside the university system. We obviously downsized, as noted, we downsized our staff, and I don't suspect that they would all be coming back. Any of those positions are, coming back anytime soon relative to this year budget, and even look out into the following year's fiscal year. We tried to create some efficiencies in that process so that changes we were making, we felt would stand for a longer period of time, and with the unknowns that were out there. So, and then on the other side of things, our coaches have been terrific in being responsive to managing their own schedules and travel and meals and all the things that go with it that entail their sports budgets, because we took a nice chunk out of that. And then we've had the luxury of having great GAs and managers, equipment managers, team managers, and so forth. And we felt like this was the opportunity we're going to have to, where everybody would feel a little bit of the pain. We pared back in some areas and really got down to a need-based system in terms of looking at managers and so forth. So with that being said, we wanted to make sure we had good cash flow, and we're looking at our debt service and things going on there. We were able to maneuver a piece of our debt during the process, and came up with what we're going to present today. So I think we're in a pretty good spot today for all that we know. And as you know, it's still fluid out there where football may fall, and we could look at more draconian scenarios, which we have behind the scenes, but not at the level of detail that we're presenting today. So with that, I'm going to have Jeff jump in. I mean, he and Weston and our finance group and business office have been terrific, because we've tested them in many ways and many drafts, but they've been great at getting information out at levels they probably never have to our senior team, as well as our business, our director of business operations for each of the sports. So really appreciative of what all went into where we are today. It certainly wasn't easy as we got this out there in early April. So Jeff, you want to take it from there and get us to the presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Vince. Like Vince said, I want to recognize the business off staff.
Jeff, we're losing you a little bit there. Jeff?
Did a tremendous
Jeff?
job throughout this process. Weston and I, Russell Hills.
Are you guys having trouble hearing Jeff? Okay.
Yes.
Hey Jeff,
Can you hear me
might
now?
want to click off. You might want to click off your video. Your sound, your audio is not coming through too well. We'll see if this is any better without. Sometimes it's easier to go out and come back.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Jeff, we can hear you. We just thought maybe you might need to click off your video because it was maybe draining on Wi-Fi because you were freezing up there a little bit.
Okay, I won't have to share my screen here, so.
Oh, that's true.
If
it happens, sorry, Jeff, if we do get in that situation where you're freezing up, let me know. I'll share the screen.
Okay.
And you can just audio tell me to walk through it.
Okay, I apologize for that. I thought it would be a bar. But apparently it's just dropped Wi-Fi. Like I was saying, I want to thank the sport administrators and the business office staff for helping us this budget together. It was a challenging, it's my 12 challenging. With that said, I'm going to jump right in. I'll try to monitor the chat room for questions, but I'm also going to stop every slide at the end and just give a second for any questions to Maureen, and we'll get started on the PowerPoint. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Not yet, but we're waiting. There we go.
Okay. So just an overview of what the budget workshop is. The purpose of the workshop, we've been doing it since I've been with the board of directors in advance of the June meeting. We go into a lot of detail that we cannot do at the board meeting, so we like to really get into the weeds on this and get all the detail. We also discuss all the key assumptions behind the budget, and all members understand the budget. Are there any questions on the actual workshop? Okay, so we'll get right into the timeline. The original budget timeline, we started in January like normal. We did our revenue projection, and at that time it was 109 million, and we used that as our starting point for our expense budget. So February, we spent most of the month working on expenditure budget with coaches and administrators based on that $109 million figure. And then March 13th hit. That Friday was we pretty much put a pause on everything, and we took a step back and we started working on our new revenue forecast number based on the events of the COVID-19 issue. So the process would have been conducted in forums with the athletic department staff, and then we would do a forum and review with the coaches, which we weren't able to do those two due to time constraints. And then the final balancing of revenue and expenses, review with the athletic director, and then review the budget with university administration CFO. So that was the original process. And then at March 13th, we switched gears. And on March 16th, we restarted the budget process in response to the COVID-19 events. We basically went in and started with our key assumptions on the revenue side. And so we basically went with a 15% reduction in key revenue lines as a starting point. March 31st was our when we finalized the number. So we went from 109 to 95.1. And then on April 1st, we rolled out that number and started working on our expense budgets with our coaches and administrators and basically giving them till the 22nd to get their detailed budgets back to us based on that new revenue target. On the 24th, we came in and we did a final balancing of revenue expenses. So as you can see, we're back on the normal process. We reviewed it with Vince on April 30th. On May 8th, we did a review draft with Dan and Rick Ruserick at the university to share our assumptions and make sure they are okay with our budget proposal. And then on to here we are on today on the 27th to kind of go over the details of our budget. And then the next step will be the final approval at the board meeting. Are there any questions on the process? Okay, so we basically broke our budget down into 3 areas. Well, we had 3 weeks basically to reset from 109 to 95 million. So we began this new process on April 1st. And we took a real high level approach to start this. We had to try to find 14 million. So we focused on the high level and we set targets based on different areas. So we set a target of let's find 6 million in our operating expenses, 1 million in our student aid, and then another 7 million in our salaries. Again, these were our high level targets we set to try to bring in, reduce the budget from 109 to 95 million. So we start at the micro level, and then from that point, again, the whole point of this too is the guiding principles where we were emphasizing the student athlete experience. So all the decisions were guided by this principle that let's try to minimize the impact on the student athlete as we work through the detail from the macro to the micro level. Are there any questions on these targets in the process? If not, we'll go into each one of these areas and discuss how we got to those figures and where our final number was. So starting on the operating expenses, this is our first category. We started with the FY20 budget, the approved FY20 operating budget, and we separated all 91 of those individual cost centers into a sport or a support area. After we aggregated them into those 2 groups, we further separate them into 8 high-level attributes. These are attributes that are in our financial system and we can pull based on actual expenses and budget. Once we had those 8 high-level categories, we did several what-if scenarios, reducing these categories across the board with the goal the goal was basically to achieve 6 million in overall savings and also provide an expense target for each of those 91 budgets. Below here on your screen, you should see now this is our final resting point on the percent reductions in those 8 high-level attributes. So you can see that you have the 2 different sport and support areas, and then you have the 8 attributes to the left. So for example, you can see here that our focus was let's protect the sport budgets as much as we can and focus on reducing the support. And we went through these several different times, seeing what the overall effect was. So the starting point basically was, what if we took out all travel of staff in the support areas? So you can see we went in and we put a factor in 100% for team travel, recruiting, because we do have some travel that's coded as recruiting and support. And we also took out the meals, mostly like entertainment. Unlike the support side, we figured the sports budgets probably could take a larger cut on their administrative side. So we reduced the admin, the equipment, and the home game expenses by about half. We try to keep some of the meals intact, and so this is the final resting point where we are to get to that 6 million overall. Does anyone have any questions about this piece? Okay, the next screen shows you just a quick sample of 3 of our support budgets and what we were monitoring on the back end with all this. So these 3 budgets, you have your administrative budget, your facilities budget, your marketing budget. So basically what we did here is we started with your FY 19-20 approved budget, that's that first column. And then based on those assumptions we had on the prior screen, the 50% reduction in admin for sports, the target is what the individual budgets came back to based on those prior reductions. So the second column is what we manage. This is your budget target. So for example, in our facilities, if you go down that second grouping there, we went back to Michael Ortman and said that this is your target, 184 million. We don't care how you get there. We just want you to try to get there as best as you can without operationally impact, with the least amount of operational impact possible. So at that point, each manager and coach went into their budget and each line item and tried to cut different areas to try to get to that target number. The final budget, which is that fourth column, is where we landed after we did the 3-week review and went and worked with each manager. You can see in the admin line, Vince's target was 226,000 and the end result was 216. So he actually exceeded his target, as well as facilities and marketing. So all three of those exceeded their target amount. So after all of those said and done, we set a target of 6 million in our operating, and we actually overachieved it by 2.7 million. So we cut about 8.7 million out of our operating portion of our budget. I know that's kind of complicated, but does anyone have any questions on this, on the operating piece?
That's amazing. That's just a comment.
Thank you. So the next section was the student financial aid. Again, we try to plan for a 2% increase in tuition, and that's based on our out-of-state rate. So the budget actually went up on that part. Earning student athletes. So we increased the aid budgets in several sports, with the total amount being about 200,000 on that line. Most of the sports have student managers that help them run practice. You see them on the benches. So what we decided to do is we thought this could be a key area that we could possibly reduce and minimize the impact on our student athletes. So we went in and across the board cut 30% on the front end. Now we did go back on the back end and adjust some less, some more based on the priority. Some sports thought this was a higher priority, so they might cut this less at every side by our sports. I talked to my customers, on do this year or next year, but we actually went in and we cut it to 200,000 back to 900,000. He can make that work, and so we'll just kind of monitor that as we go throughout the year.
Jeff, you cut out a little bit there on explaining bullet point 3 and 4 there, just so you know.
Finally, okay, so back to bullet point 3, and I apologize. I'm getting the bad network connections here. We had several of the sports have a sport manager. Several sport managers, so we thought we could go in and reduce that line to minimize the impact on our student athletes. So across the board by 30% on the front end. On the back end, we did have some sports who thought that were to increase it next year, but we actually reduced it from 1.1 to 200,000 for next year. And then the final piece of this was we went and we did a deal back down to some actual expend levels. So you'll see more of that in a future slide, how we did that. So on the aid, our target was 1 million, and we actually exceeded that by about 100,000. Hopefully you can hear me. Does anybody have any questions on the student aid? Okay, if not, we'll move to the final piece, which is salaries and benefits. This was one of the toughest ones, and this involves several people as we work through this. So one of the first things we thought of right out the bat is, why don't we eliminate our vacant positions
This
and
is
do away
this
with
is
our auto
real
and
this
sell
is real bad audio
allowances.
right now.
So right off the bat, that million.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
Jeff. No, I'm sorry. It's very
Yeah.
choppy. Can you try turning off your video? We'll still be able to hear you and still see your presentation, but that should increase your network bandwidth and reduce the choppiness.
Okay. How's that?
Coming through loud and clear now.
Okay. So are you going to run the PowerPoint?
We can still see that, Jeff.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
on you.
Yeah, we can
Thank
still
you.
see it. We can guide you when to flip the next page. Or you should be able to see exactly what we're seeing, Jeff.
So, like I said, back to the, yeah. Okay, perfect. So going back to the second bullet there, we implemented a 10% reduction, about 0.3 million in savings. Let's see, I can't advance. Onto the screen. I'm going to share that with this. Let's see. So if you can hear me, the next, I'm going to leave my video on salary reductions for staff. So we reduced across the board 2% for those under 100,000 and 4% for those over 100,000. And this resulted in about 200,000 in savings.
Jeff, we lost your.
And the final piece.
Jeff, we lost your screen.
All right, let's try this again.
Need to share it again, Jeff.
That
No, still no screen there.
can you see? I've never had this problem. I'm going to log back out and log back in, I guess. Try that.
Just do a quick in and out. Now try to share it again.
How's that?
It's not coming up yet. Waiting for the file to come up.
Can
It's not.
you see that?
There we go.
Got it.
Now we see it.
Okay, so the last piece there was we had to reduce our head count. And you know, we did this, we held off on this as long as we could because we wanted to see if we could in other areas before we had to take a step. So the final piece of that was about 1.4 million in savings. So as I mentioned earlier, the target for the salaries and benefits was 7 million, and we were fortunately we had to, well, I know that's a high number, but we were able to cut less by 2.9 million than what our target was. And most of that's because we found more on the operating side. So salaries and benefits. Okay, so now we'll just start at looking at the budget itself, which you should have received a copy last night. Here's an overview of our revenue expenses. So starting on the left there, you have the sources and uses. So the revenues, you have it by category. You have your football, stadium, men's basketball, for a total, with the first column being the original operating budget. So you can see our total revenue and operating budget for 1920 was 104,350. And then from there, the next column is our actuals as of April 30th. So through April 30th, our revenue was at 86 million, or 86.1. And then the third column is where we try to project out where we're going to be at June 30th. This has been a very, very fluid now. So we monitor this almost every day to keep an eye on the revenue expenses. So right now we're projecting about 107.5 million in revenue. And then moving to the final piece over to the last, the far right columns, that's our FY21 budget. So you can see our operating revenues at 95.1 by category. We have restricted revenues of about 14 million for a total of about 109 million. The second piece of this is the expense side. So we've broken it out by the different cost centers. original 4,350. Actual expenses through April 30th was about 93 million, and our projection for June 30th is probably about 104 million. Again, this is a very fluid number, so again, we're monitoring this on a almost daily basis. So, and then moving over to the right, you can see our operating budget, the 95.1, and then we have the 12.2 million in restricted budget for a total budget of 107.3 on the expense side. Very quickly on the sources in here.
We're losing you again, Jeff.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
kind of broke up. I think the highlights there that on that prior page, just noting, I think everybody can kind of see what the revenues were projected for us to finish this year, and obviously the good news is at the very bottom is that this is what we were excited to try to build upon before the COVID, and that was the fact that we're looking at a profit of over 4 million for fiscal year 20 in the athletic department, which is helpful in a lot of ways, and frankly helpful to bridge some of the gap we're thinking about or heading into fiscal year 21.
Thanks, Vince. Okay, if there's no questions on this screen, we'll switch over to the revenue side right now.
Hey, Vince. I'm
Yes, Steve.
only worried a little bit about the revenue coming up, which is, I guess, what he's getting ready to talk about. But your forecast for the revenue looks pretty strong.
Yeah, the original, as we mentioned, Steve, we thought we were going to be in the 109 range, an operating budget 109, and you're looking at 95.1 operating. So I think that's the concern. The operating for fiscal year 20 was this 107.5 over in the third column. So we thought it was going to be up incrementally. Obviously, we thought football would drive more of that, and then we pulled back on both football and basketball incrementally at this point in the revenue side, and then some other areas that we pull back we can get into. Jeff will get into some detail. We'll see later on licensing and other areas that we've come back to 95.1. That's where we are today. I mean, certainly we're as intrigued as anybody to see what happens in the football as it relates to fans. That's the big question mark out there that we may have to make further adjustments once we learn more.
I agree.
Vince,
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff,
Vince,
and this is Sam.
Yes, Sam.
What was the primary assumption on the fan?
Yeah, we looked at it in every category, Sam, from suites to premium seats to season ticket holders and then single game tickets. So there were assumptions in each bucket related to that. Frankly, our suite holders and premium season ticket holders have been pretty steady for us. And to be honest, to date, where we are on seat donations related to football is we're right on target. But where we thought there may be, just the economic compression on those, filing unemployment and so forth that may impact our fan base, we backed off the revenue in the season ticket holders. But relative to what we thought was going to happen, we thought single game ticket money would hold, if not incrementally move up, because we thought people may back off buying the whole season ticket and maybe shift over to a single game, particularly as the season moved on, and hopefully there was more or less concern for safety in the stadium. But we were backing off 15% or more in some of these categories, and in the football revenue, and then you can see in basketball dropped off. We did a similar look at basketball, trying to pull back incrementally, again looking at the same thing: suites, premium seats, season ticket holders, and then single game ticket moves there. There's actually a detailed spreadsheet behind all that. Michael Dudas and the Cardinal Athletic Fund, as well as our our ticket sales group and senior management, kind of sit and weighed in on each of those line items to come up with our assumptions.
Thank you.
Hey, Vince or Jeff, each sport has their own specific club or philanthropy effort, for lack of a better term, dugout
Yes.
club, MasterCards. How does that play in? And can those funds, are they sit in reserves, or can they be in circumstances like this used for operating funds?
They sit in a restricted account. Every sport has a restricted account. Jeff, I don't know what the balance is today. Call it 4 million plus or minus. That sound about right between all sports. I may have froze up, but Larry, you're correct. Every sport has donors who may give something sports specific. We're losing you, Jeff. But those dollars can be used. It has to be. We don't let coaches use the dollars at their own leisure. They usually submit some use to the business office or to myself to gain approval for any of those dollars. But we can use them in certain cases. We just want to make sure it doesn't go afoul of donor intent. And that's the thing we focus on a lot in these areas, is just making sure that what we're doing fits, because some donor intent may be only for equipment for that sport, or only for a team going on a West Coast trip or something like that. So we want to maintain the donor intent. And then if there's other areas where it's unrestricted, we've had some come say, hey, if you need funds to cover that part of that GA, you can shift them over if you wish. But we've just tried to up the approvals and the communication when it comes to restricted dollars. A good example would be like the red zone for football, who donors give and help additional dollars on, Scott for recruiting, for travel and recruiting for he and his coaches. Long answer to yes, we can do that, but just want to make sure what's in the guidelines.
Sure. Thanks.
Jeff, are you froze up, or can you jump back in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're just kind of going. You're still kind of going in and out. We're going to get a restricted account for your Wi-Fi. Send you some money to.
You know me. I'm watching my budget over here.
We thought you were watching Netflix at the same time and taking down your Wi-Fi.
Wow.
All right. Yeah. So
actually, my son's a mechanical engineer. He's designing conveyors in the basement. So
all right.
I do apologize. Okay, so if there's no more questions on this slide, I'm going to dig into the revenue. Not really dig in. We're going to stay high level. If I can share my screen here. There we go. So this slide basically shows how we got from 104,350 to 95.1 by category. So the other category actually went up a little bit, but you can see from this slide that the three primary decreases were in our football, men's basketball, and seat donations. And this is mostly in ticket sales and suites. And there's some that's with the ACC revenue money we have in there. So that's where the bulk of it is. And that was based on pretty much a 15% reduction in revenue. Marketing we have going down slightly for this $95.1 million budget. So from this, you can see how we got from 104 to 95.1.
The one thing that I know may be asked is about on the revenue side is the ACC network. And one thing to note there is that on that media side, the dollars are based upon distribution and not directly tied to advertising sales. So households is as more important to us as now. Certainly, we want them to have the proper advertising sales and everything else, but to have a healthy model. But the way we earn our money through the ACC network is additional households. And I think that's what we've talked about historically is we ramp up in distribution of households, particularly once the Comcast grouping comes on, their current contract with ESPN expires in September of 21. And that would bring on a nice, hopefully a nice another round of subscribers to add to this distribution. But we've got off to a great start this year. It came in incrementally higher than our budget for this year, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain that going into fiscal year 21.
Any questions on this chart here? If not, we'll turn to the sources of funds. So from this pie chart, you can see that basically the football and basketball program, despite decrease in the last slide, it still makes up approximately 62% of our revenue between those two sports. followed by the marketing area, then the seat donations. And these percentages are right in line with historic trends and the current year budget. There's no questions on this. Here's a trend analysis comparing 3 years of actual revenues and 2 years of budget. So you can see from our revenues have gone up slightly each year. This year, we're probably going to be about 107, so that growth has continued through this year. So next year, you can see where the 95.1 compares. If there's no questions on the revenue, if you can still hear me, we'll turn to the expense.
We heard that, Jeff. I think that the bridge, just noting that we have the fiscal year 20 budget, and Jeff noted that the actuals coming in at 107.5. We had better than expected revenue for football, better than expected revenue in basketball and ticket sales. Both teams had great. Football had a great turnaround. Basketball had a really solid year, and then ACC revenue up incrementally as well. Were three key drivers in lifting this from 104.35 to 107.5. Okay, go to page 18.
Okay, so turning to the expense side, again, here's our sources of increase, decrease, how we got from 104,350 to 95.1 million. As you can see on the top, the three increases are all in our team area. So our team meals, team other, and team recruiting all went up. And that team other is equipment, and I think there's some other smaller areas in there, but it's mostly equipment. And then as you work through the list, the biggest decreases were contingency salaries and the financial aid. And I'll get into the contingency amount there in a future slide. So again, this basically shows you how we got from the original FY20 budget to our 95.1 on the expense side.
The one thing that I'll note here is obviously we're going to have some expenses related to COVID, whether it be additional PPE or hand sanitizer, whatever it might be that we get into. Fortunately, we had some masks that were donated to us. But when we get into those expenses, we're making sure we've created a separate bucket for all those that Jeff can track them all, whether they come through the sport or through business office, so that we know when we go into next year's budget where all those line items were, that it doesn't muddy up our budgeting for fiscal year 22. So we made sure that we'll track all those expenses through the year to have a clean run at the fiscal 22 budget as well.
If there's no questions on this, we'll turn to the application of funds pie chart. So you can see from this, about 54% of our expense budget is still dedicated to our sports. Increase from 49% from the FY21 budget. And then most of this increase is offset by a decrease in the other category, which that's primarily the reduction in our contingency amount. So you can see from this slide, again, we tried to protect our sports as possible. So 54% of our expense budget is dedicated. Side where our expenses have been falling. So you can see we've been right about 103 million since FY17. We've got 3 years of actual and 2 budget here. The FY20 budget should be right in line with that 103, probably about 104 million, I think is where we're going to land. So again, we trend right between about the 102 to 104 million. And then FY19 is a little bit an anomaly because we were paying out the severance for the football staff. So that's why that's skewed higher from the other years. Are there any questions on this trend graph?
Just a quick one. Wasn't there, in essence, savings in the spring, though? Because the sports, I realize they don't have that high of budgets, but I would have thought there would have been even a greater reduction. I might be missing something.
No, you're right, Larry. If you go back, remember the $4 million surplus we were showing on the sources and uses? That's where that is. We will have a pretty solid year this year. So, yeah. But we're going to pretty much put all that cash for next year to cover some obligations. But It should be about 104. But we also had a bowl game this year, which that drove our expenses up quite a bit as well. So next slide, we will look at the financial aid. So you can see financial aid is about 15 million every year. You have 3 years of actual and 2 budget here. One of the things that Wes Nimes did in our office, did a really good job, is he went back and looked at our trends on all the different categories of aid: books, housing, or
We're losing a little here,
and what
Jeff.
we tried to do was true up the budget for 21 based on actual prior year. So you can see for a fiscal year, okay. The FY20 budget was about 16.2. So what we did is we went try to true up 21 based on actuals. So where we landed this next year is about 15.3 million.
Yeah, I think the thing that note, just real quick, Jeff, the thing to note there is you got the, excuse me, the asterisks in the bottom of includes summer school aid, and that's something that we've tried to bump that along the way, having more of our student athletes participate in summer school. It keeps them on track to graduate. As most know, many of our football players graduate in 3.5 years now because they'll be around in the summer working out, taking 6 hours. If they're in engineering, they take 9 hours. So we've been trying to cover as much as we can, and Marvin Mitchell manages that segment for us, does a great job of balancing out where the best place to put our additional dollars. We had put additional dollars into more manager aid and trainers, student trainers and things like that, and that's some of the areas that where we had boosted up. We pulled back to some degree going into fiscal year 21, and that's why you see a little bit of dip in lieu of what we forecasted as a tuition increase. Okay, Jeff.
Okay. Next slide shows our debt service from budget from operating. So we have the different series right there on the left, and running across the top, we have the amount funded from pledges and cash balances, which is about 7 million. The second column there is the amount we're going to carry over from our FY20 surplus, which is about 2.3 million. And then the amount we have budgeted from operations is about 2.4. So the total of that, if the P&I, is about 12.2 million for next year. In the finals,
I guess what
there's
one
no
thing,
questions on debt service.
Yeah, just for to be clear, I think we showed earlier that we'll have, a little north of 4 million in profit this year. That's what Jeff's referencing in the fiscal year 20 surpluses. Of that amount, we're using some of that profit pulling forward to reduce the debt service related here, that 2.343 million. Okay, Jeff.
Okay, there's no question on final strength analysis. So you can see where the changes occurred. So last year we put in 2.2 for performance bonuses, and next year we've reduced that amount. And we were able to reduce that amount due to some of our coaches, they were waiving their bonuses next year. I can't say enough how great it's been to work with the staff. They've been really understanding for this. So that's how we were able to go from 2.2 to basically 800,000. On the post season, what we do there is the sports do not budget any postseason budgets. We don't make the postseason. So what happens is when they do make the postseason, we'll transfer money out of our contingency to cover any difference between the cost and how much is reimbursed by the NC or ACC. So next year we're reducing that by about 200,000, and we're going to have to tighten some of the restrictions on who travels and try to cut down our expenses next year on that area. The third line there, we budgeted 500,000 the current year budget for a staff salary equity study we did, and we basically went back and I think we used about 400,000 of that. So we had that we actually have that baked into our budget this year, and so we will not need that next year, that contingency. The fourth line there, salary increases and positions. this was basically, you can see where we balanced our budget, because it's not a round number, but we don't anticipate having any salary increases or new positions next year, so we took that to zero. The excise tax, this is for high wage earners, anybody over $1 million. We had about 1.1 budgeted this year. We're down to about $1 million next year. And a lot of that savings is due to the fact that some of our high wage earners are taking that 10% reduction. So not only is that going to help us in the salary line, but it's going to help us on this excise tax line as well. The second to last, that Coach Petrino liability, well, we had 2.2 in contingency this year. We did not budget any next year for that. We're going to cover that through year-end money and cash balances in the account. Then a line there, that's our true contingency amount. So we had about $1 million this year, and we're backing it down to about $723 next year. So as you can see, we went from basically 8.6 million in contingency down to about 3.4, which is about a $5.2 million reduction. Are there any questions on the contingency side?
Okay.
That's all the slides I have. So,
Hey, Jeff, go back one slide.
Page to go to page 23, Steve?
let's see.
Or
I was actually looking at the draft that Jake sent out, and there was, I think it was slide 12. Looks like total debt service.
okay.
I was just curious about that number. It looks like total athletic association. Are you on, I'm sorry, slide 13 or page 13 of the draft?
Got the debt service slide up.
Yeah.
Can you see that? Okay.
I can't on your presentation. No, I can just see the page. It says fiscal 21. We have 9.7 million with the Athletic Association, and then 2.5 UL and ULF. Is that UofL Foundation? What is that second column?
Jeff, he's referencing page
Hey,
13
Jeff,
on the
let
budget.
me,
your debt
Jeff,
service.
Jeff, will you let me share my screen
You're
and
in the
take yours
budget book.
down?
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
All right, let's see if I can pull this up for you. This is the page that Steve is referencing. Can you all
Correct,
see that?
thanks.
Can you- So this
Yes.
is this is where Steve had his question, Jeff, on the why were they broken into two columns here?
Yeah, and the stadium debt, that's a big piece of it. And I think the foundation could be the golf course. I think that's just a small piece, but most of it's held by the university.
Well, I like it that it's constantly going down year after year. I hate that it's all the way out to 2036 and we still have a bunch of debt service, approximately half. But it's, I was just curious about where all that individual debt was. It does present a lot of service that we have to make, but, and you know, it's during this time, Vince, I'm absolutely amazed at what you guys have been able to accomplish. My hat's off to you. Your projections look great. Knock on wood, we get there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, Jeff, would it be a correct assumption that monies for legal defense, public relations, all those kinds of buckets, do those come out of reserves, or are they partly allocated by the university and the foundation in terms of everything from anything that might come up, NCAA or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, we've actually got a line item in our legal budget. Next year, I think it's at 700,000. And then we put some money aside at the end of last fiscal year as a reserve to cover anything that might be coming up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we
You're
tried to
welcome.
keep that one out of the contingency layer and just do the line item. We looked at, unfortunately, because of the NOA, we tried to think about what we might have in the coming fiscal year based on what we experienced in the prior one. And Amy Shoemaker, who's on the phone, was helpful in that too as we looked at our legal bills. I think Jeff noted this too about the coaches, and as most know, that when I originally called them and we talked about not just our coaches but our senior staff, and about taking a 10% reduction for the fiscal year, the full fiscal year, and now it's become the kind of the fad and across many of the Division I schools. But everyone was really helpful in asking what else they could do and other ways they could help in that regard to a coach. And it made those conversations easier. It certainly made it easier. Much of the senior staff is on the call here today, and my conversations with them, they're certainly not at the level of some of the upper end coaches are and so forth. But everyone was willing to chip in and do their part. So, as I told them, and sending them all a meat and cheese and fruit board wasn't all my thanks, but it was something to just tell them appreciate the support and all that they're doing on behalf of the athletic department, our student athletes. But it's meaningful what they've done here, and I think that if things go awry, and let's say there is another spike in the COVID and it causes a second round, that's where we haven't exhausted energy in that, but we're certainly have gone through and looked at where the buckets would be that we'd have to spend more time on to try to be more responsive to that. Now, obviously, some of those expenses, the way we've looked at this, is fixed and variable. So there are some variable expenses. It's not all fixed. So if we don't have a football game, there's certainly variable expenses that go along with that. Those running that stadium for the game. So that's the way we've tried to look at it from here, is so that we have a quicker way to try to define where we should go next, and our variables as much as are fixed. And keep in mind that these head coaches were nice enough to certainly accept their reduction, as was our staff, but contractually they didn't have to. And we were able to get them to do a one-page acceptance letter to the side. It wasn't a full amendment to their agreement, just a one-page acceptance of the reduction for this fiscal year, and it would revert back to their prior compensation July 1 in fiscal year 22. Yes, Eric, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hey, Vince. Hey, who ultimately will decide if sports will be played or postponed in the fall? Is there some committee, or is there a single individual? And is there a scenario where some schools want to play and some don't, and the ones that want to will, and the ones that don't won't?
Yeah, I think, I'll start with the front of it. And, this is one of the knocks on college football, is there's no football czar. You'll hear that probably more in the coming 60 and 90 days. There's not a football czar, like somebody who oversees football, because the NCAA certainly runs and operates the basketball side and the tournament, but not so much on the football. So there is a football oversight committee. There is a Division I council that looks at these things. But a lot of these decisions that are being discussed, including return to campus, that the NCAA put out. But when it comes time to kicking football, if there's a school that's in a hot spot, let's say there's the virus, they're located in a hot spot, and their university is uncomfortable, they have the opportunity to make an individual decision on their campus and may not, participate. And that's where the conferences have to make a decision as to, resetting the schedule, if you will, if they're not going to play. And I think that that could happen. I don't know how likely that is, and hate to speculate on it too much at this point. But, right now, these decisions seem to be being made. Fortunately, our A5, the Power 5 commissioners, and no offense to the other conferences, but they're talking on a routine basis almost daily right now. And certainly this is a topic, but even they would admit that it's a little early, a little premature to make a call on things until we see how this advances through the summer. The return to campus, the importance of the return to campus that happened last week is that now we have student athletes returning in June for voluntary workouts. So that puts us sort of back on pace as the quote unquote as normal as it would have been historically. And what that now means is you've heard a lot in the media about everyone saying if we're not going to be on campus during the summer, we need 6 weeks to get ready for the first game, to physically get ready, do the physicals, conditioning, and then be ready to go for early September. Now that the student athletes are being availed the opportunity to be back on campus for voluntary workouts, I think that puts us back in sync with a 4-week schedule, which is what it's been historically, where those 2 weeks may become valuable in the decision-making process at the conference level and across football as to, whether we're a go or no go, and then that inside the conference, whether schools say they're a go or no go. But unfortunately, there isn't one source that is going to say all go or all not go when it comes to college football. It's going to be, if you think times are unique right now, wait 60 days. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Vince. That's very enlightening, and I'm kind of laughing with you. Wait 60 days. Everything has changed in 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there, and we didn't know anything 2 months ago.
Yep. Well, and there's some advances here, but we know a lot more. Maybe how to control it, but I don't think we figured out how to eliminate it. I think that's where everybody's working towards, is how to mitigate this as best they can. I know this is the budget meeting, but we did talk about tracking all of our expenses, and we've got a pretty good in-depth program about how we're bringing our student athletes back on campus in phases over the summer, and working with our group, Kevin Gardner, who's our EVP of Research and Innovation, Dr. John Klein and others in infectious disease to help create guidelines for us. We're fortunate to have the resources we have in Louisville, both at UofL Health and Norton Healthcare, to help guide us on these decisions. And those are daily conversations about, what we're doing and how we can do it better. It's not just the facilities on how we keep them clean and keep the student athletes in safe order when they're working out, but it's in between times as well, on how we have them masked up and when they're to and from facilities, and how we're going to use cleaning supplies, etc. Any other questions for Jeff this morning? Well, I'll note that this budget, as you guys know, rolls up under the university budget, and tomorrow will be a full-blown university budget workshop meeting, which I see Rick on here. I believe Dan may or may not be on here, but we've worked very closely with them along the way over the last really 6 to 8 weeks, as not only in designing our plans around expense reductions and how we're going about it, but also thinking about how this feathers in with the university budget. And it's been pretty collaborative from that front as well. Certainly, we're always looking for their feedback and challenges and so forth as we think about the university side of thing and other what-if scenarios. So they've certainly been helpful in playing a role in our process with Jeff and I here. So we'll go through this somewhat again tomorrow. All right, Jake, it sounds like we may have covered all that we need to this morning on this.
Thank you, Vince. And yes, we will have the trustees budget workshop in the same format tomorrow, and we'll include some of the information. I plan on sending the trustees the link to the live stream so that they can view this on their own, as well as sending them the materials that we have provided here. If there's no other questions, we'll end this. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions that you think about after we end this workshop, please send them to me or Vince, and someone will follow up with you directly. Without further ado, I will adjourn this workshop. Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Have a great day.